Thank you for joining us for our series of videos explaining the unique opportunities of 5G. On our last video, we talked a little bit about the 5G network itself, and unfortunately the fact that the Chinese are dominating the 5G space, so to speak. They're out way ahead. You mentioned Huawei and some of the stuff going on with that. Tell me how do we know for sure that the Chinese are ahead? What makes you say that, Bill? I guess I just don't want to believe it.
That's exactly right, and it is hard, especially for me, to believe it, coming from my telecom background, where AT&T was the leader.
Yeah.
And now to be able to have to say that AT&T is no longer the leader is hard to say, but it's true.
Okay.
And what happens is there's the number of 5G patents for the network is by far the highest with Huawei. They've surpassed it by 20 or 30%.
So they're out in the lead in R&D.
At least they're about a year ahead of the two other networking companies, which are Ericsson and Nokia, two Swedish companies.
Oh, so neither one of those are American either.
That's exactly right. Although Nokia has the old Bell Laboratories, they bought them several years back, so that's hanging on to Nokia. But the bottom line is Huawei is so far out in front that our country is trying to put in place more political tools to basically stop their lead. But what they found out is they try to do that, they inhibit other companies, U.S. companies, that actually sell the component parts to Huawei. And that happened recently with Qualcomm, where Qualcomm is a huge chip manufacturer which supplies chips to Huawei, and our government said, no, you can't do that anymore, you've got to dial that back. Well, that caused an immediate dive of the Qualcomm stock, and so we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot, Ray, when it comes to how do we stop this. We've tried different processes and ways to do it politically and otherwise, but I think it's going to be hard to do. I think Huawei is going to be there for some time.
So let me get this straight in my head, Bill. So Qualcomm then is the chip maker, which I think of in a cell phone or the device that's in my hand.
Correct.
Okay. And then from our last video, you explained you got the chips, so the device can handle 20 times more data.
Right.
You've got the network that needs to be able to handle 20 times more data. And then you got the device on the other end that needs to handle 20 times as much data. So Qualcomm's really good at both ends. Sounds like Huawei is dominating in the middle, the network itself.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, the other thing that I think I remember reading, though, and I don't want to get too political about this, but it seems like China, in addition to the usual unfair trade practices, there's real security concerns about Huawei and the network itself. Am I remembering that?
No, that's exactly right, Ray. And actually, this goes back several years when Huawei's switches were under implementation in some companies, and they found that some of the data that was going through the network was actually leaking out and tapped through one of the software applications in the network. And so that's what started the whole idea that you can't really trust Huawei in terms of the data going through. And if you can't trust them in your network, you basically lost network security across your whole network.
Well, yeah, and I got to think, if we're talking driverless cars, security's got to be paramount.
Absolutely, and not only that, but from our own defense, security from our own personal information that we have, everything then becomes available through the network if you're not assured that you have a secure network.
Interesting.
So you can't have any backdoor trapdoors coming off the network going somewhere else.
All right. So I think if what I'd like to think about for our next conversation is talk a little bit about the components that make up 5G. So like we talked about before, you've got the chips, you've got the network, you got the chips on the other end, you've got all that in between. I want to kind of start to try and wrap my head around it as an investor as to what type of companies make the most sense as I'm looking at 5G and $12 billion that's being spent on that kind of an upgrade, it'd be interesting to find out exactly who those dominant players are.
Right, and Ray, when you start to think of that process of going from the cell phone to the towers to the cell phone again through the network, obviously the towers are a big part of that. And one of the things that we have going here in 5G is that with the increased speed, you need to have towers that are closer together, because the existing tower distances are too far apart to handle these speeds. So you're going to have more towers, you're going to have more antennas hanging off of these towers
Okay.
to be able to handle all this data that's going through.
I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Okay, thanks.
Thank
Ray.
you.